Hey everybody, how's it going again? My name is Evan Brenner, Digital Content Specialist at Geographic Solutions, and I thank you for joining us today. We have a really special presentation, but just a little bit of a background on the Pathways to Employment series. Over the last couple years now, since December 2020, we have gone through so many different awesome stories, and we have showcased how clients have performed our outstanding work day in and day out, covering hot button issues throughout industries that we serve and that tie back to workforce development. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that's very near and dear to our heart because our Vostrio software is in the service of helping folks who are re-entering the workforce. And in just a few moments, we're going to be discussing tactics that you can use to help job seekers find meaningful employment and employers help to find untapped talent. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get into this presentation. Please submit questions and comments in the question window. It's going to be in your floating GoToWebinar pane, and I will be moderating those throughout the presentation, but we will hold those for the end, and then we will have a discussion towards the end of this presentation, including all of your questions. This presentation will not have closed captioning, but we will be having a follow-up to this on a resources landing page that we will share with all attendees who signed up and all registered registrants that will have closed captioning. We will make a recorded version of this presentation available, as I just said before. And now I'd like to go ahead and introduce Jeff Abramowitz. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. And thank you. First, a big shout out to Geographic Solutions for having these great sessions. Obviously, they're informative and engaging, and I'm going to be, for the next hour, your cruise ship director, your educational cruise ship director, and Evan's going to be the chief steward. So if you have questions, I welcome them. Please put them in the chat box, and Evan will bring them to my attention, and feel free at any point in time. And Evan, if you can interrupt, feel free. I really want to make sure we capture the questions when they come up so that we can make sure they're in the right context and not at the end. Rules of engagement today are pretty simple. You're going to listen to me and hopefully be engaged and add some of your questions into the chat box, and hopefully you'll get some valuable information as a result of the webinar today. One other thing I will promise you is that I do cover a lot of information. So if you have in your chair a seatbelt, you're going to need to buckle that up, and also be mindful that I will be sharing the slide deck. So things that go past you or that run pretty quick and I go over, don't worry about it. You're going to get the slide deck. I promise I'll get it to Evan and make sure he shares it out across the network. So with that, let's kind of get started. And we are going to talk about workforce development today and the untapped talent of justice impacted individuals. But before we do that, and to give us all kind of some context of who's on today and watching, if you can in the chat box, throw your name, maybe where you work in your position. But I want you to think about this. I don't want an answer, don't put it in the chat box on this one, but I want you to think about the most embarrassing thing you've ever done in your life, the most embarrassing thing. And I just want you to hold on to it. Just write it on a small piece of paper with your notes. Just keep it right aside there and hold on that, because we're going to need that later on when we talk through a little bit about the process that justice impacted people go through. So there you go. So what are we going to do today and what are we going to cover? Well, we're going to start by looking an inside look behind and beyond our prison and the walls of our prisons and jails around the country. We're going to be talking about the benefits of hiring someone that's been justice involved and what that pool looks like of individuals. We're going to talk about the journey from the application through the interview, and then what that hiring and onboarding process should really look like. Things like the drug screening and background checks and things that really pose barriers to gainful employment. We're going to talk about the law and a look at the law that helps and also the laws that don't help so much. And then we're going to talk about how to retain and advance those talented employees in the system. So where to start? So I am your facilitator, cruise ship director, whatever you want to call me, but I think in order to to understand a little better the context we're going to be talking about, you need to understand the glasses that I wear. So the glasses that I wear today are very different than glasses that I've ever worn before. And that's in large part because of my life journey. So I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was born in Philadelphia, went to Ohio State. I'm a Buckeye for undergrad and law school in Michigan, and came back to Philadelphia to practice law. I practiced for a little over 20 years as a civil trial lawyer in Philadelphia, and then about 10 years ago, made some really horrible choices in life. And I use that word really intentionally. They're choices. We all make choices in life. Some of them aren't so great. Some of them lead to different consequences. I made choices that landed me in front of a courtroom on March 12th of 2012. And for the first time in my life, not as an attorney, but I landed in that courtroom as a defendant. On that day, I was sentenced to 5 years in a federal prison. And I took responsibility for the choices that I had made and wanted to find out two things as I sat in a back holding cell in the courthouse, in the federal courthouse. I wanted to understand, number one, why this happened to me so it never happened again. And I could personally make sure that never happened. And two, I wanted to understand what the bigger picture was. Like, what was this journey that I was being sent on, and what was the message that I needed to learn? So during the course of my incarceration, which was 5 years, I was in a federal prison. I learned everything that I could about everything. I read over 1,000 books. I taught over 60 classes, from public speaking to CDL driving to GED math. I learned how to drive a tractor trailer and operate a forklift. I learned how to work in a warehouse and change oil on a car and do all these crazy things that I'd never experienced before. And I learned about people, and most importantly, I learned about our justice systems. I returned a little over 7 years ago to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and during that time, I was homeless. I lived in a shelter in Philadelphia, and that's where I got my first job, teaching GED math. At $7 an hour. I was teaching GED math in a really challenging area of North Philadelphia, and quickly became a director of workforce development for that agency. The journey from there has been just a crazy one. I've been able to take a number of leadership positions in reentry and start a reentry program called Looking Forward. I was able to be very active in the Philadelphia Reentry Coalition, and that led to a seat on the Pennsylvania Reentry Council under the Attorney General in Pennsylvania, where I chair the Employment Committee. I sit on the Pennsylvania Workforce Development Board, on the Reentry Subcommittee. I lead on that. And about 5 years ago, was hired by JEVS Human Services in Philadelphia. JEVS is a very large workforce development agency. It's been around 80 years, a nonprofit, but we own a technical college, Orleans Technical College, and we have work-ready programs. We oversee our Career Link, or our American Job Center here in Philadelphia at Suburban Station. We have all these wonderful programs at JEVS, including the Choice is Yours diversion program and the Looking Forward reentry program that I oversaw. And it's been an amazing ride. But the day that I got hired by JEVS, I also was asked by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education to start the Prison Literacy Commission. And I started that and currently sit as on the board of directors of COABE. The Coalition on Adult Education in Washington is the adult advocacy arm for educators across the country, and they do some amazing work. So the journey continued, and I currently wear a number of hats. I sit on a number of national boards. I currently do work for the U.S. Department of Education as a subject matter expert in reentry and correctional education. And I am very passionate about the intersection of workforce development, adult education, and criminal justice. So the glasses I wear today are those of an educator, an administrator, and also someone that's been justice impacted. And that plays a large role in what you're going to be hearing today and the views that I bring to the table. So untapped talent in this discussion is about what happens behind our prison walls, and as men and women come out, a look at the talent pool that exists behind the walls, and for all those people, and also the why. Why is it that we should even be having this discussion at all? Why is it we're looking to the justice impacted to fill a need that we have? And we'll talk about that in detail. And also how are you doing it? Like, why are you going? How are you going to jump into this area and start working to solve a problem, fix a problem that's been under the radar screen for decades? So we're going to talk through some of these issues, but I think we all need to start with the facts. And I do believe that a person without an opinion is just another person with an opinion. And it was stated by Einstein. So I look hard at the facts to see what really is happening. And in the world today, we have 1.2 million people that are incarcerated in our jails and prisons. And approximately 70 to 100 million people have a criminal history, a criminal background. It's important for us to understand, though, that a criminal background starts with an allegation. It starts with you're being pulled over by a police officer and him indicating that he's going to write you for a citation for something, whether it's a misdemeanor or a violation of any kind. And that's the trigger. That's when a criminal history technically starts. And what we're actually beginning to understand now is men and women that have been in the workforce for decades, sometimes have worked 20, 30, 40 years, and then as a result of COVID, maybe have left the labor market, and now are trying to get back in. They're realizing that there's some things on their criminal record that happened to them when they were teenagers, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and now they have to deal with them because it's stuck on their criminal record. We should also understand that in our justice systems today, we spend about $60 billion each year in our criminal justice systems. Now, understand that perspective, it's probably the equivalent of one of our major departments, the U.S. department in our government, right? About 600,000 citizens are released each year, and a few more have come home during the period of COVID. But the sad part of all this discussion is that approximately 2/3 of those that will be released are going to find themselves back behind the walls within 3 years. And that's the tragedy. And that's where we need to really focus on how do we work to help people not only leave prison so that they're prepared for what's next, but also keep them out and keep them as productive citizens with a career pathway to success. So I call this the color of justice, and the reality is that 1 in 3 Black males will find themselves incarcerated in their lifetime, 1 in 6 Latino, and the largest growing population in our country now is Black and Latino women or Latinx women who are finding their way into the justice system. The irony or tragedy of it is it really launches men and women that are Black and brown are dramatically impacted by our criminal justice systems and correctional systems that are in place. And we just really don't have a good handle on what to do about it. I call it diversity, equity, and confusion, because although we recognize there's a problem, how we deal with it and how we fix it, it has been and remains a confusion to many companies as well as organizations around the country. Equipping individuals for the life after their incarceration is really so important when you recognize that about 94 to 95% of all those women that are behind the walls are eventually going to come home. They're eventually going to be released and they're going to come back to their communities. So we really need to think about, well, if people are coming home, how can we help them? And when does that start? And honestly, it really starts day one, the very first day of their incarceration, the first day they go behind the walls. There's no question that education inside of our prisons and jails is one of the keys to the door to stop the revolving prison doors. And that's because, quite frankly, we know that if you offer just one class inside of a prison or jail, that the chances of someone going back inside is 43% better than not giving them anything at all. So if you have a 43% better chance of not going back inside of prison, why not offer them the opportunity to get educated, to get skill developed? And the reality too is that most jobs today require more than a high school diploma, but less than a college degree. And that's a target area that involves the vast majority of men and women that are justice impacted. So the reality check here is that we know and recognize over 14,000 barriers to employment, education, housing, borrowing, licensing, and the categories go on for men and women that are coming home. And around 70% of these are employment related. They were they are directly related to someone getting a job, keeping a job, and that's something that we have to recognize. If you've not read this book, he's a good friend, and I recently was with him at a conference of Jeff Korsenik, who works for Fifth Third Bank in Chicago, has written a book called Getting Talent Back to Work, the Untapped Talent Pool. And I strongly encourage you to read it. It is the kind of book that will open your eyes to the value, the monetary value, the return on investment of working with justice populations, and why it's so important to engage in this entire population. So when we talk about justice and getting people back to work, I don't think that we can do this in isolation. We have to wear the glasses of the individuals that are coming home and those that are working in the system. And we have to understand that coming home means a lot of things to a lot of people, but it generally across the board means that there's going to be a situation of some kind of transitional housing that's going to need to be considered, that they're going to need some kind of skill, training, or employment that's going to help them find that pathway. That identification, clothing, and transportation, these are things that are going to need to be addressed immediately when someone comes home, because quite honestly, they're not going to be able to work without them. That education, medical and addiction support, and legal support are all things that fall into that bucket of concern as men and women come and they begin to navigate the challenges of their next life and the next journey. So there's some things that are pretty obvious when we talk about barriers to employment. The first is a criminal background. When men and women come home, there's obviously something on their record. And oftentimes it can be one charge or it could be 100 charges. In our country, one of the things that's been challenging in our legal system is a habit across the board of prosecutors to charge as many charges as they possibly can to a defendant that's been arrested. And the challenge with that is that once it's there, it is a charge, and if it's not prosecuted, there are ways that it may come off. But understanding a criminal background and what's involved in the criminal background and what it means, how to read it. I was with someone not too long ago that was in the HR field, and he said, yeah, we couldn't hire this guy. He was acquitted for all these charges, and obviously didn't understand what the word acquitted meant. But the reality is that there's a lot of times people misread what's on the background. And I often encourage people when they come home to get a copy of their criminal background so they can see exactly what's on it and whether there's any inaccuracies. Education is often a barrier. There are many men and women that go through our justice systems that have educational challenges, understanding fractions and reading and all the basic literacy skills. Digital literacy is a big problem across the country. Men and women do not have access to the internet while incarcerated, and often don't get digital literacy training. So when they come home and they're tasked with finding that job, and we send them over to the computer to go and do their job application, what really happens? Wow, what happens is they get frustrated because they get on that computer and they're unable to navigate the computer and actually download their resume or cut and paste something or understand how you save a file. So digital literacy skills are so important as people begin to navigate their world coming home. And it's something that we're starting to do a much better job at, but it's been off the radar screen for the longest time. Problems of identification. We should be thinking and making sure that every single individual that leaves a prison or jail in our country has two forms of identification. Look, if we're tasking people to get employed when they come home and get a job and a career, then we should also give them the tools, and two of those tools that are essential by way of law. I mean, you cannot get hired in our country without two pieces of identification. So a driver's license, a social security card. I mean, those very vital pieces of identification should be given to individuals while they're in the system and as they walk out the door. Supervision restrictions and limitations often pose barriers to employment, as do occupational licensing. In the law, for the longest time, in some states, you were not able to get your barber license renewed. We're seeing a change in this now, and we're seeing occupational licensing boards across the country begin to understand that we can't just blanketly say you can't do this career anymore, and at least give them an opportunity to state their case, to talk about where they've been, their journey, and let the occupational licensing board determine their character since they've come home and since they've done their time. So all of those are kind of obvious, right? The not so obvious things, transportation. I often is probably one of the biggest barriers for men and women coming home is the ability to get around. Oftentimes they don't have a car. Their driver's license is still in the process if they haven't getting it renewed, and actually getting to a job site or getting somewhere so that they can work is an unbelievable barrier. And we have to think of ways of supporting people when they come home. Like when they go to get that job, do you need transportation for the first week? Or do you need transportation to the interview? How about clothing? Do you have clothing that's appropriate for the job interview, or do you need clothing? Those are things that we often take for granted. I also don't think we have enough understanding that when someone comes home and they begin their life again, that the addiction challenges that they had sometimes before they went inside, they have not miraculously gone away. They were just tucked away because of an inability to use a substance that maybe they had some challenges with. So my suggestion is to really understand that addiction support is something that's important as we talk about helping people navigate back into the workplace. Housing and shelter, behavioral health issues and dealing with some of those, physical health issues, even as far as providing feminine products to women that maybe can't afford them when they come home. And then essential skills. There are a lot of men and women that are coming home that have not used certain skills in sometimes decades while they were away, and really bringing them up to speed on those essential skills that they have. And essential skills are when you're in prison and you're incarcerated, there's often like a safety zone around you. When someone gets into your zone, your red flags go up. Things like that, where when you come back and you're in public transportation, people are in your zone all the time. So there definitely is an adjustment from incarceration back into the community. And then simple things like having a bank account or getting your credit report and understanding what's in the credit report, or rebranding and getting credit period could be a huge issue. I came home and I think my credit was under 200. I think dead people have credit larger than that. It was a challenge rebuilding because I had a financial crime. So it was a challenge redeveloping that credit and being methodical about it, as well as even getting a bank account to be able to set up and have my funds direct deposited from my first employer was a tremendous challenge. There's also a harsh reality in today's world that, we today have 11.3 million job openings in the US. And currently, we have 5 million job openings than unemployed people. So we have more unemployed jobs than we have people to fill them. And yet, traditionally, the justice impacted workforce has an unemployment rate of 27%. So we're about 3%, 3.7% today. That is a number higher than the peak of the Great Depression. And we need to really start thinking about how we can help people kind of navigate getting back into a career path when they get home. What happened during COVID was no big surprise. What we saw across jails and prisons around the country was tragically a lot of death. We saw a lot of people that, especially our elder populations, that succumbed to COVID. But we also saw a lot of shutdown. We saw a lot of programming shut down across the board, and during COVID, those program shutdowns meant that men and women are now coming home, but they weren't coming home prepared for what was next. They weren't getting skill trained, they weren't getting educational supports, they weren't getting programming supports, they weren't getting addiction support, whatever it was, they weren't getting it during COVID because of, understandably, the crisis that was going on, and a tremendous staffing shortage in our prisons and jails around the country. That was something that severely limited the ability to move men and women around our prison systems, as well as to have them in classes or training programs. And now we really need to think about opening that door back up and making sure all those programs get back opened up, and even more so because the windows of opportunity for men men and women coming home are even greater today than they were before. So what does it mean to be a second chance employer, and who are they? Well, I can't answer that. Quite honestly, I think everyone today that has a need for employment wants to call themselves a second chance employer. First of all, I don't really appreciate the word second chance. I know it's used a lot in the justice sectors and it's used a lot in the reentry field. I, I'm not a fan because, quite frankly, when men and women come home, it may have been their third or fourth or fifth or sixth chance. And just because we say they need a second chance, what happens to everybody else? And I know it's semantics, but it is a message. Second chance employers are employers that are beginning to open their door to say, you know what, I think we're going to take a careful look at the men and women in our labor pool and take a look at the candidates, and maybe we should be giving them an opportunity. Even companies like CVS. CVS is a wonderful company, and in CVS recently has a project with Jeff's Human Services at our Orleans Technical College campus for a farm tech program, which is awesome. But the important thing there is, they have thousands of warehousing and logistics jobs in our country. So they should be opening up those jobs to men and women, and also give them an opportunity to be in the STEM field and to look at that. I know I've been doing some work with JP Morgan Chase nationally, which is now starting to open the door and looking at fields like finance and how we can do a better job with helping men and women get into finance and healthcare. Traditionally, sectors that have not been reentry friendly are now on the table and now part of the discussion of what is it like to help people find that career path and that career. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. So what's a friendly, reentry justice friendly employer? I was with a very large employer. I don't see their name on here. And we had a discussion with them nationally about what it would look like. And they said, well, why don't we just give them like orange vests so we can identify them? And that's really not what it's all about. It's really recognizing that there are some special considerations that justice impacted individuals might have, and that you might need to work through in order to not only keep them in their employ, but also give them an opportunity to stay employed, as well as keep that retention piece and that advancement piece. Because in today's world, that entry level position just isn't going to cut it for most of America anymore. People need to know and understand that there's a next step, that there's a next place to go to, that they have opportunity at a company. And companies like Walmart and Verizon and Lowe's, they've opened the door, but they should also understand that, opening the door means, giving them the room and the ability and the opportunity for advancement. And that comes with both education and training and skill development. So what is it that we need to understand? Well, we should recognize that most employers and HR professionals believe that workers with criminal records perform their jobs as well, if not better, than others in their workforce. And that 70% of HR professionals report their organizations would make special considerations, such as displaying understanding of the gaps in employment history, or if an applicant disclosed a criminal background, asking him, about it, but being candid about it. Really understanding how to navigate some of these challenges takes HR professionals, and there's some wonderful tools that are out there. There's a great tool by SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, called Getting Talent Back to Work. And in that, it's, if you just go and Google Getting Talent Back to Work with SHRM, you can actually sit through a certification program where, as an HR specialist or anyone, can learn about how to effectively hire and retain people that have been justice involved. And what does it mean? Well, does it mean that a probation and parole officer is going to come out and, and check him on my workplace every day? And does it mean that I'm going to, I'm going to be subject to liability if something bad happens? And what are all those things and all those questions that are out there? That's a great resource tool to go and ask those questions, and to look at the certification program, because you really can educate you and your HR staff and all of your teams about what it means when hiring somebody that's justice involved. I think we should also talk about a little bit about why the why of it. So why should you hire justice involved individuals? It's interesting because I've been home 7.5 years, and we weren't really having this discussion when I first came home. And part of it, I think, is because of the reality that we need labor, that we need talent in our labor market. And that's happening for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is, quite frankly, is that our population is decreasing. We are actually losing we're losing population as we grow. And because of that, there's less men and women that are entering the workforce. So using that 70 to 100 million people that are qualified, that are talented candidates, that have a skill set, is just smart. It's a smart practice. And it also, there's a moralistic kind of view about this too. It does give people a chance to succeed in life. Based on choices that they've made in the past, we're now giving them an opportunity to grow, to better themselves, to be productive in society. And it does improve the community. I'm curious about the finance piece of it. Like, if you think about it, there's some obvious things that happen when you keep someone out of prison and jail. Obviously, you're saving money from not incarcerating them, right? Because it can range from, I've seen as high as $160,000 per person in New York to keep somebody behind the walls. But then there's other things, like if they're productive and they're making money, they're improving the gross national product. And they're also keeping their families off of the welfare rolls, and they're going to be healthier, and their children are going to grow up. And it just makes good sense when we talk about improving the community. And it also makes financial sense. It's giving a return on investment to everyone, employers, governments, communities. It's a win all the way around. And it's just the smart thing to do. So if you really want to know how your company is doing, and you're starting to get into this field, one of the things that you could do is ask yourself these 10 questions. And these 10 questions, don't have to write them all down here, but if you go to levelset.us fair chance hiring assessment, it says 10 questions. And these 10 questions are: what's your policy for disclosing convictions on your job applications? Do you have an internal policy for running background checks? And what do you look for? What's part of the hiring decision? What are the things you're looking at? And is there a team approach in recruiting someone with past convictions? Or how do you vet them? How do you look at them? Asking yourself all of these questions: what's your strategy? How are you going to communicate it? Is there a team approach? If you ask yourself these questions and start diving into them, that will kind of guide you along the way as to where your holes are, and the things that maybe you really need to start thinking about as you look at hiring talent and bringing them into the workforce. So in the hiring process, there's obviously the application piece, which is someone comes and they fill out the application, and is there a job description? And understanding first in the job description, does it really match what the requirements of the job are? And oftentimes, people that are just as impacted are whittled out because they don't necessarily have all the requirements that are met on a job description. So take a close look at your job descriptions and see, do they really fit what the job task is and what you're asking for somebody to be successful? Then you should be aware of laws like ban the box. So ban the box is a law nationally which says if you're going to if you're an employer, you can ask the question in a ban the box state of, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Now, you can't ask it on a job application, and you cannot ask that question during the interview. And in fact, in some places, you can't ask that question until you've been given a conditional offer of employment. So, hi, John, I want to hire you for $10 an hour. And I have to ask you, is there anything in your background that would not allow you to do this job? And in those states where there is ban the box, the problems are a few. One is there's tremendous exceptions to most of those laws. So most ban the box laws have exceptions for things like being a police officer or working in security or working in a hospital or working in a school. And there's so many exceptions that it really gets watered down in most states. And the other thing is just this intrinsic issue. When you're not asking the question of someone, then what you're really doing is you're encouraging them not to be open and honest with you during the application process. And I think my policy is that I want people to be able to tell their story. I want the employer to know exactly who they are when they're hired. And part of the problem is a realistic one. I'll play out this scenario. I hire John, and John comes to work for me and never asks the question. It never comes up, do you have a criminal background? So John works for me for 5 years as a rock star employee. And I hire John on, and then I'm going to give him a raise, and I'm going to give him a supervisory role. John, come on in. Here's your check, and go down to HR because we're moving you up to supervisor, and you're going to be handling a lot of money now, so we got to do a background check on you. Now, this is the first time in 5 years anyone's asked John that question. And the truth is, John probably will not only not get that job, but John probably will, if it's a condition of him having that position, will probably be terminated. So if we're open and honest about things, then we should be open and honest right up front. And I know I get arguments about ban the box laws as I speak across the country, because I do think in some ways they could be a good tool. I just think that they need to have some teeth to them, some bite to them, and they need to be based in reality and what really happens in the field. And with Google existing, people get Googled all the time by coworkers and by employers, and they're gonna find out. So I'd rather people not make assumptions, and that's what Ban the Box does. It makes assumptions, and I'd rather them not make assumptions, but know the whole story right at the beginning. Getting educated. I think it takes everyone to be educated as to what happens in the justice system. And I think it's a really important point to stop here for a second to recognize this. In our justice systems, we plea bargain over 95% of our cases. So oftentimes, men and women accept responsibility for their actions factually for things that they did not do. And it happens all the time. Did you ever go have a traffic ticket and you go into court and the judge says, oh, go over there and work out the deal with a prosecutor, and you plead down to something so you don't get points on your record or whatever that is, and you stand up in front of the court and you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and you swear, and you accept responsibility for something that factually you did not do. So I think there's a lot of education that goes on here about what really happens in the system and how we can educate employers as well as employees to level the playing field and be educated about the process and what's really happening as people come home out of the system and what's involved, and then understanding how you get in the game. So here's where this is the interactive piece, and I want you to think about this. I want you to think about the most embarrassing thing you've ever done in your life. Hey, you got it? I asked you to be thinking about it. All right, the most embarrassing thing you've ever done in your life. And now I want you to think about, truthfully, honestly, how likely would you be to tell that to a stranger during a job interview, or put that on a job application if you're trying to convince somebody that you want this position? Just think about it. Probably, if you're really honest about it, probably not so likely to be able to do that. So I just want you to understand that the discussion and the issue is a lot more challenging than you think, because as I say, going through prison and the justice experience is one that is extremely humbling to me. I'm certainly not proud of the actions I took in my past, although I am proud of the things I've done and the lessons that I've learned along the way to make me a better person. And that's what it's all about. The HR picture is really about looking at your hiring policies and practices. What is it that your company does? Do they have a blanket policy of totally just not engaging anyone that's got a criminal background, or do you accept someone with lower level offenses? And there's no right or wrong to this. I'd love to see the door opened as wide as possible, but there's also a reality that some offenses just are not proper in some circumstances, and we really need to acknowledge that and remember that. Licensing. can somebody actually do the job when they get hired, or get a license in an advancement of a job? And that's something that I also hope that you'll be thinking about. If you get somebody a job and they want to be a CDL driver, can they cross state lines? Or are they supposed to stop at the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, get out of the truck, call their employer and say, I can't leave the state. I'm not allowed to because I don't have, I can't leave jurisdiction, go out of the jurisdiction. So be really mindful of the licensing and also the regulations that flow with individuals as they come home. Look at the federal and state laws that may help some people in their system. Pardons and expungements have been huge across our country, and those pardons and expungements can make a world of difference to what someone has on their background. But the problem or the issue is that it just takes time. Men and women that are coming home, they don't have time. They need to feed their families. They need to put diapers on their children. They need to put food on the table and get to work. They need clothing. They need a roof over their head and pay for their cell phones and a car and whatever other responsibilities they have. So really understand that while pardons and expungements are great tools that are there, especially if they've been out for a longer period of time, and you should really investigate how you do that. There's a lot of legal services that are free that will help you do that. I also don't think when it comes to hiring people in the HR space that in today's market that these are not Willy Wonka's golden tickets, okay? Look to your local laws too, like the ban the box laws we talked about. Are there things that laws that may restrict you from asking the question? The new trend in our country is a thing called clean slate. And clean slate laws are in Pennsylvania, they're in Florida and some other states, and these are automatic removal of things on someone's criminal background that were not prosecuted or were just charges and they didn't move forward on, or they were found not guilty of. The clean slate laws around the country are amazing. In Pennsylvania, we've removed millions and millions of things off of the dockets and off of people's background checks simply because of clean slate law that says if it wasn't prosecuted and it's this old, it comes off. And that's really what needs to happen more and more across the country. Background checks and drug screens. We should understand that, when you do a background check on someone, that maybe the good thing and the prudent thing to do is ask somebody about it. Ask them to explain, if they can, a little bit about what's on their background so that you're not guessing and you're not looking at just one piece of paper, but you're getting a better picture of what exactly happened. And that's the same thing with drug screens. Oftentimes, men and women come home and have a drug issue. That drug issue remains when they come home. You should be preparing people and letting them know, you're going to get a drug screen right up front. So if you're not clean, maybe get some help and then come back and see us when you are clean, so that we can give you some support along the way and get you into our employment. Ban the box legislation is in a number of states across the country, some stronger than others. And again, I'm not sure that it's 100% effective, but it's something just to be aware of. So I want to talk a little bit about what it looks like. The HR function, assessing the candidates and not the record, is really the bottom line. When you have managers, you should have a standardized process in place of how you're handling everyone. Don't just treat justice impacted information differently from other applicants, but just have a process for addressing it. If it comes back and someone has a positive background, what are the things that you want to know or need to know in order to hire this individual? And most importantly, does it directly impact their ability to do the job? Because if it doesn't, then you shouldn't even be considering it. But if it does, then you should have these discussions. Consider convictions that are recent as opposed to things that have happened when they were in high school or grade school or younger in their lives. And really, you want to conduct and do your own assessment, do your own check to see, are they qualified for the job? And sometimes looking at past prior records can be helpful. Looking at a certificate of rehabilitation, which is happening more and more across the country. These certificates that say they've gone through these training programs, they're ready to get back to work, and they've met this minimum standard. And also whether they've had a skill set that the employer is seeking. Did they go through a training? There's so many occupational training programs out across the country now. You should, if somebody walks in with an HVAC certification or a OSHA 10 or OSHA 30, those are things that can be really helpful. And oftentimes they're getting them behind the walls when they get home. Getting into the game also means getting ready. I call it get ready, get set, get out, right? It's things that happen before they even leave, and things like setting up a resume, making sure that they have some digital literacy skills, career exploration. The worst thing that can happen for men and women coming home is for you just to throw them in that job. If someone walks into your door as an employer and they just don't want to do the job, they're just there for the job itself, I think you really, as an employer, do a tremendous disservice to them and to you by bringing them on, onboarding them, spending thousands of dollars educating them, teaching them, getting them ready to do their job, just so that they can leave in a month or two after they've gotten some money in their pockets. What we need to do, and part of the solution here, is really being targeted. Asking the individual, what's your career pathway? What do you want to do? What's your end game? Where do you want to be? And if it aligns with what your company does as an employer, then you really should think about it. Keeping that person, how are you going to advance them? How are you going to move them forward? They may need math remediation to get there. They may need additional reading support or computer support, but really preparing them for that job and giving them the training they need is what's happened. Look, I speak around the country, and universally employers tell me it is not, I can teach anyone to do anything in my company at all. I could teach them to do any job just about in my company, except for the real high-tech things, almost anything in my company, but I can't teach them to be on time. I can't teach them how to deal with conflict with co-employees. I can't teach them how to wear their pants so their butt crack doesn't show. I can't teach them how to, how to deal with other conflict and all these other. So those are the things that we need to be working on with men and women as they reintegrate in the community and understand that maybe it's a pull aside. I think a better way of handling that with John may have been to do this and use it as a teaching moment. Make sure they are work ready and prepared to enter back into the workforce. Things that are not in the game plan. Applying for a job online and downloading a resume is kind of one of the biggest questions and biggest problems people have coming home, is being able to get into that, getting internet access, getting a computer, doing it from a cell phone is so challenging sometimes. Then how do you ask the felony question? Do you ask the question, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Should you be asking it, or should you take it off and wait for a later point in the stage of the interview process to go there? How you deal with it as a company is something that you have to think through and you have to have a policy for. And then also you should be transparent of the consequences. The consequences of transparency is really understanding that you want somebody to be upright and honest with you from the very beginning. And if not, and are you really encouraging somebody to play hide the ball? Should you interview and accept applicants with criminal records differently from candidates without a record? No. You really shouldn't. You should be one process for everybody. What you should have is, when this issue comes up, have a set procedure for how to deal with it, and know that it needs to be done in fairness to the candidate that has the record, and also with respect to the candidate that doesn't as well. And the only way to really do that is to focus on the skills, to look at the core competencies of the individual and can they do the job and can they do it effectively. So the law. So the law is today, is hard because there's nothing. And recently, if you are familiar, down in Atlanta, which is crazy, down in Atlanta, Georgia, they actually passed an ordinance or a law in the city that says that a justice impacted individual or somebody with a criminal background is a suspect classification. So if you know constitutional law, you know that if you can't be discriminated because of your race or because of your age or because of if maybe you have a handicap under the Disabilities Act, but So there's certain classifications that your religion that you can't be discriminated upon. And now states and some cities are regulating and making it a suspect classification that if you're justice impacted, you can't be discriminated because of that. And that's a pretty big, that's a pretty big and significant gain in our country for those that are trying to enter back into the labor force. Again, be aware of occupational licensing, clean slate, and pardons and expungements. There is law that I'm not going to read this, but there's under the federal law of what you can and can't do. Just remember that you really need to take into account the nature of the conviction, how long ago it happened, and the nature of the job. Is it something that would impacts the individual's ability to do their actual job? And that's the standard that the EEOC and the federal government looks at today. Compliance with the federal standards, it's really looking at making sure that you're following all the guidelines of doing a background check and making sure they have a copy of it and giving them an opportunity to talk about it. There is a huge concern in our country, but at least they say there is. Some employers say it's not so big a deal about liability. So if you hire someone with a justice background, does that make you more liable or susceptible to a lawsuit for someone if you hire someone and they're negligent in their work? I mean, the truth is, if you look at the data, that very, very small, less than 2% of all liability insurance claims have anything to do with negligent hiring, and it's just not something that's founded in reality. So it may be something that employers use as a justification, but the truth is, that it just doesn't. It just is not what happens in the workplace. Things like workplace safety are important. We should be very concerned about the workplace safety, public branding issues, and also the navigation through our legal system. Evan, do you want to jump in?
Jeff, yes, I was trying to find a place to interject here, and
sorry.
No, it's been fantastic. I feel like there's just been a fire hose of information. I just have, been very in awe of everything that you've shared. So I appreciate it. I think the audience feels the same, and we have had quite a few questions entered into the chat. So, and by the way, we have folks attending from everywhere from California to North Carolina. So I think that's just amazing. But going back in some questions, back to 1:20 p.m. here. Karen shares that one thing that we struggle with is that we serve individuals coming out of jail, shorter sentences, but less opportunity for training and positive engagement prior to release. COVID has forced a reduction to in-custody services. They're always looking for strategies and adaptations developed for when somebody is going from the prison environments to jail. If anybody wants to help address this, so that's a question from Karen.
Yeah, so Karen, that's a great question. And there are some tools that are out there. And as I mentioned earlier, I do some work for the U.S. Department of Education. And there's this wonderful thing called an IET. It's an integrated educational training. And it's a fancy word or fancy term that really is a simple model. It's where you take a math teacher that teaches fractions and you put him in or near a classroom with a carpentry instructor as he teaches carpentry. And then you blend into that some workforce preparedness. Now, these tools are built into our WIOA or workforce laws, and there's opportunity there for these kinds of programs. We launched in the last year 8 of them across the country and inside of correctional institutions. I just think that we have to be more intentional about getting people smarter into the workforce, and that means sometimes, allowing them to work a night shift so that they can go and get their credential during the day, or allowing them to go into post-secondary and go into college program at night when they're working during the day, and vice versa. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I do agree, during COVID, a lot of these programs were shut down, and it is really super different for jails than it is prison. I get it. In a jail setting, they could be here today and gone tomorrow, right? The short-termness of a jail. But the important thing to recognize, if you have that short-term time frame, that you need to provide them resources while they're inside. And I'm not talking about giving them an HVAC class inside in a jail. That may never happen, right? But it doesn't mean you can't give them an HVAC training program when they walk out the door, or you can't guide them to an educational support agency or a Title II agency when they walk out the door. Or you have a reentry program that is right there waiting for them when they walk out the door, so they can get them to housing and clothing and all those things that they need. We just start too late. What I believe happens is, outside of every prison and jail in our country is this fast flowing water. And this water has rocks and debris in it. And it also flows back down often to the neighborhoods that caused them some challenges that got them into trouble. So our job as employers, as reentry support agencies, as government agencies, is to get them over that water. And that means creating these bridges that actually connect them to services before they walk out the door. Why is it that we don't give people all this information when they leave that's current and updated, so they know exactly where they have to go? Or even bring people on the outside inside and say, John, you're getting out next week. You're going to come see me next Friday and 2 o'clock, and you're going to be here, and here's a pass. I'm going to leave it in your file, and you're going to get to come to see me when you get out. Those are the things, the intentional things that really need to happen so that we can build this network. Look, this takes a village. This is not, it's not on the shoulders of employers, and it's not on the shoulders of prison systems, and it's not on the shoulders of our justice system or our support agencies. This takes everybody acting together and getting together to the table and saying, okay, how do we make this work together to happen? And that's the same thing with keeping talent. Retaining talent and keeping talent is so vitally important. And that means not only securing the right fit, somebody passionate about the job, but giving them the tools to succeed. And that could be help getting a bank account, or the training that they need, or a place that they can get clothing or transportation. All those things are part of keeping talent. And keeping talent is also, it's a responsibility of everyone. It's the employer all the way through the chain. Onboarding best practices, are just simple. You don't want to single people out. You want to be empathetic. You want to be clear. Don't assume anything. Don't assume they have a phone. Don't assume they have clothing. Don't assume they have transportation to work. Don't assume they have anything other than that they're there and they want to work for you. And in the onboarding process, make sure that you've dotted every I, you've crossed every T, because a lot of times it's just communication where it falls apart, because they just don't understand. And that even means explaining their paycheck to them so they know what all the deductions are, what to wear the first day, how to come to lunch, whether to bring lunch, where to go when they go to lunch, all of those safety things that you need to talk about as well. Onboarding is a process. Take your time with it and don't make any assumptions. Train your supervisors. Train your supervisors and let them understand, what some of those challenges are that some of their staff might face. And then again, I really feel strongly that, when you bring people on, you should be thinking about maybe giving them their first check in advance, so they have a chance to get some clothing and things they might need for work, or being able to pay their way the first week, some paid time off, or partnering with outside organizations, or doing some financial literacy, getting healthcare for them, or providing just basic benefits for them in a package is a great first step to retaining that talent pool. We only have a few seconds left, but a few minutes left, but SHRM's Getting Talent Back to Work. If you haven't checked it out, you definitely want to check that out. It's super good. It's a short course, but definitely a ton of resources on there for HR specialists that could be really, really helpful. Grow with Google, career readiness and reentry. Google has this whole great platform now that is pretty good. Definitely is easy to navigate, and a good way for you to get educated about what's happening. And then you will get, as part of my talk today, all of the resources I talked about today. Anything that I mentioned in my talk is on a Google Drive that I will be sharing with you, and make sure that everyone has access to, and all the links. So before I close, I will mention that I am an executive director of Jeffs Human Services. I oversee their justice partnerships, but I'm going to be leaving Jeffs in December 1st, and I'll be going to an organization called PD Green, PETEYGREENE.org, and it provides educational support in correctional and reentry facilities across the country. Super looking forward to it, and really I wanted to I'll open the floor up for a few minutes for questions, but thank everybody for joining me today. And if you have any questions, my contact information is on the screen. Feel free to even check out my website or give me a call on my cell, and I'd be really glad to help. Evan?
Yes, Jeff, thank you. And, just talking about embarrassing things and stuff like that, we've done in our lives. One would be myself choosing the wrong microphone before this webinar started. So just today, I did something embarrassing, and, hopefully that never happens again. So, yeah, we have so many questions. And Jeff, if I could just ask a few before we go today. So Jerry asks, his question is that he's finding CEOs or upper management willing to buy into diversity and inclusions by offering job training, paid apprenticeships, and et cetera. He asks this question because many prison programs have interior managerial programs and even opportunities to earn higher education degrees or certificates, but often when released are lucky to receive reentry level offers. So I think that might just be maybe more of a comment than a question, but Jerry,
super true. But the root of that, Jerry, quite frankly, is because we don't offer enough programs to give selection. So what ends up happening, men and women take programs inside of the walls that they don't necessarily want to do when they get out, and then they end up getting a certification in something and not wanting to use it because it's not what they're passionate about.
And going back a little bit in the presentation, Aaron asks, is there typically a cost to get a copy of the criminal background?
Yeah, so there are. There's a number of ways of getting it. There generally is a small charge for getting a criminal background and doing a criminal background check. And quite honestly, we see this also in the landlord-tenant field, where landlords often do criminal background checks or tenants going through, and they make the applicant apply for or pay for their criminal background check. In most situations today, the employers are bearing that fee, and they generally have a contract with employment agencies, and it varies depending on the depth of the background check that they're seeking and how detailed they're going to they need to go into the background. But there is generally a fee that's associated with the background check.
Most excellent. Rebecca asks, what is the name of the HR certification on hiring justice-involved individuals? I forgot if that was covered briefly there.
Yeah, it's Getting Talent Back to Work. And it's SHRM, it's Society for Human Resource Management. And if you go to SHRM, Getting Talent Back to Work, that application or the tool comes up, and you can take the assessment course. It's like 10 modules. It took me probably a day and a half maybe to work through and listen to them all, and then take the test.
Okay, Elizabeth asks, is there some wording that they can get to refer to for strategic cover letters?
Yeah, there is. And if you just want to shoot me a quick email, I can give you some of the language. I think there's a lot that's out there right now in the field, and some of the places that you might want to look to are some of the reentry service organizations, some of the national coalitions that are doing this work. SHRM, I know for sure, has some that are out there that has some templates and some letters, and I'd be willing to share them as well, and I'll attach them to some of the resources that I have.
All right. There is a lot of questions. And so, Jeff, I think what's best is just I like to be considerate of folks' times. We're here at 2:03. We advertised this for an hour. And so I thank everybody for joining us today. Jeff, the information was just above and beyond. And so, Jeff, I'd like to send you maybe these questions. And if you want to reach out to folks to answer some of these questions, I think maybe that, that you can, decide at your convenience what you would like to do. But again, Jeff, thank you so much for being here today. On behalf of Geographic Solutions and the Pathways to Employment series, I sincerely appreciate this. And thanks to everybody who has taken the time out of their day to attend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.